Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Kernahan Webb. I am the director of the Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility, and I'm a professor here in the Department of Law and Business at Toronto Metropolitan University. And it is my pleasure and honor to have as a guest here for this particular in-conversation session, Dr. Toussaint Kafir, speaking on balancing development and ecological justice in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Very much looking forward to this co-sponsored session with Canadian Jesuits International. Just to mention that all of these sessions are held in the spirit of constructive engagement, trying to figure out what is the way in which businesses can contribute to well-being and not actually make things worse from an environmental, social, human rights, and other standpoint. So that's kind of like the underlying objective of all of our work here. Next slide, please. So Toronto Metropolitan University is located in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Next slide, please. All of the Toronto Metropolitan University CSR Institute sessions are animated by the following definition of social responsibility, which comes from the international standard ISO 26000, which is a more than 100-page standard, but this is just the definition of social responsibility. And as you can see, its emphasis on transparency, ethical behavior, contributing to health and welfare and sustainable development, taking into account not only the expectations of shareholders, a fixation of certain in the business sector, but also expectations of the full range of stakeholders, workers, consumers, community members, governments, and so on, is in compliance with applicable law, but also consistent with international norms of behavior, such as the ISO 26000 standard itself, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the OECD guidelines, and so on. And it's not only about integrating it within the organization, but also practicing it in the relationships outside of the organization. So if you're talking about a government, it's its interactions with communities, businesses, consumers, workers, and so on. And the same is true with respect to corporations, interactions with communities, workers, investors, and so on. The full range of impacted or potentially impacted parties, as the case might be. Next slide, please. The second and related animating concept for all of the TMU CSR Institute work is the concept of sustainable governance, which basically starts from the proposition that given the challenging issues that we face in the 21st century that are typically fast evolving, multi-jurisdictional, and complex, really the only way we can effectively address them, if we can address them at all, is through a combination of government, the private sector, and civil society, each uniquely harvesting their capabilities and energies through their own instruments, institutions, processes, and actors. And sometimes that means collaboration among them all, and sometimes it means more of a rivalrous or a check and balance relationship. Next slide. So when we talk about institutions, we mean entities that are carrying out particular public interest functions. So that would be Parliament carrying out legislative functions, or it could mean ISO with their rulemaking functions, or civil society organizations with their rulemaking functions, or any implementation related functions, and so on. So there's institutions carrying out their functions. There's rule instruments, which range from laws when we're talking about government through to standards, principles, and so on when you move beyond the purely public sector side of things, using a range of different processes from dispute resolution, conflict resolution, through rulemaking and rule implementation, and then a huge range of actors involved. So that's the taxonomy that underlies the sustainable governance framework. Next slide, please. So just to let you know that these sorts of TMU CSR Institute events happen quite regularly. If this is your first time here, welcome. If this is the second or third or fourth time you're here, welcome back. And just to let you know that, for example, we have one coming up later in June, which is on global multi-stakeholder coalitions, building them, how do they work, what are the challenges, that sort of thing, which I would suggest in these turbulent times, global multi-stakeholder coalitions can potentially represent one of the ways in which we can address some of these very difficult challenges that we face. And so you can see as well that there's regular updates in terms of things that we're doing here at Toronto Metropolitan University. And if you do have any ideas for upcoming sessions, please feel free to email me, and stay tuned. Next slide, please. So Toussaint is going to be providing us with a detailed discussion of the very challenging situation in the Democratic Republic right now, and the work that he in particular is involved in that regard. But just some highlighted points here is how important the Democratic Republic of Congo has become in terms of certain minerals that it has. And so therefore, how attractive it is, not only to other parts of the world and businesses in other parts of the world, but unfortunately also to armed groups that would like to intervene and take a cut and then use that to fuel wars and violence and to engage in a lot of very negative things. And unfortunately, that is the story of the DRC, is that it has been the site of some very, very significant and horrific misconduct of all sorts by governments, by private sector, and civil society. And so it is in that context that the work of Father Toussaint and many others is really under the spotlight as to what can be done. And so basically, that is the question that we're trying to really explore here, is what is the optimal governance response from governments, private sector, civil society, intergovernmental bodies, and so on, to the ongoing crises. And we can add in now, on top of everything else, the Ebola crisis that is now impacting in the DRC. So we have a very, very challenging situation, and we have people working on the front lines in there, such as Father Toussaint. So next slide, please. Briefly, with respect to Father Toussaint, he's the director of the Centre Europe for Research and Training in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Before earning his PhD in global politics and international relations from Loyola, he received a BA in philosophy and then a second BA in theology and STL degrees in ethics and social theories from Santa Clara University in California. He's lectured widely around the world, and I know he just got back from a very significant lecturing, which is yet another reason why I'm grateful, why I think we should all be grateful for him taking the time after coming back from what would be an exhausting tour for any of us. Again, our gratitude to Father Toussaint for taking the time. And as you can see, his research interests include international relations, global politics, public health, social justice, ethical leadership, societal issues, democracy, and African politics. So in other words, hardly anything. I'm kidding. And all of those are directly at play in the DRC. So he's using all of his talents. Next slide, please. So just a note that we do have people patching in from around the world, and we are very grateful for them doing so, especially those who are patching in at odd times of the day and night. If you do have any thoughts or questions or comments, what I would ask is that you email me at that email address that you see there, and I will do my best to fold in your comments and questions in the conversation, which is just about to begin. So without further ado, over to you, Father Toussaint. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation.
And again, thank you so very much indeed for those wonderful words of introduction and for providing the opportunity for us to have this conversation across oceans. We briefly mentioned about the blessings and curse of progress and technology before this conversation started. But I assume this is one of the benefits, to be located far away in the DRC and just be able to reach out to an audience, which I salute, warmly from Lubumbashi, the DRC where I am located, and from where I am speaking. So thank you very much for hosting this conversation. Before maybe I also dive into the little, thought that I have prepared for our conversation this evening here, maybe afternoon there, and morning some other places. I want to acknowledge the CGI, the Canadian Jesuit International. Indeed, I've just returned, as you mentioned, Kernaghan, from a trip to Toronto, where I had the opportunity of meeting several people and discussing some of these issues that are affecting the lives of not only Congolese people, but many people around the globe. Um, Positively or negatively, of course, but it's a big and good reminder that the world has really become one village, one big village, and that globalization is real, and that some of the decisions being made in high places like Toronto or Paris or Washington, D.C. or Tokyo or you name it, are having a tremendous impact that many people may not be aware of there, but our lives and our environment are somehow bearing the brunt or paying the cost of, all the progress that we're making. So CGI was able to bring me in, and we had this conversation. And I know that CGI has been amazing in reaching out to just, the globe worldwide. Accompanying communities, empowering communities, and helping development really to take up, the real meaning it's supposed to have, not only measured in terms of how much output or money or, growth, economic, as I will be discussing in a few minutes, but also putting the human face and seeing how we can grow the global awareness about justice. And so with those few words, I also want to say thank you for all those who tune in from wherever they are located. Devoting time to such a conversation shows not only concern, but also, friendship and care. So thank you so very much indeed. I'll be very happy if I can share my screen, if you do not mind. So maybe just really quickly. Okay. Okay. Okay, very good. So, Kernaghan, you mentioned what we are going to be discussing about, and my topic will consist of, talking about balancing development and ecological justice. But I think I shouldn't say only ecological justice, because that is one dimension of justice. I should say really integral justice, because it involves not only ecology, but communities, societies, histories, and everything else. And we need to have a conversation that is much more encompassing. Um, so by way of introduction, I think we are all, concerned with how the world works, things that are happening. We know that we are really in the midst of transitions, let's say. I won't say a transition, but transitions. And these transitions, multiple transitions, as I'm putting it. I also found this idea, this concept, in a recently released encyclical by Pope Leo the 14th, which is being discussed in many places, universities, organizations, because it brings us really to kind of discern, listen, and understand what is really going on here. Okay. And these changes are being driven mostly by, let's say, the energy transition, let's say the digital transition, let's say the climate transitions, of which we shall be talking about. And I want to say that Africa, again, is really at the epicenter of these changes. Not only Africa, let's put it this way. I think the critical minerals, as people are calling them, are really driving these changes, because there is no way we can talk about the changes taking place, or the change of an era, as Papa Leo has put it, without looking at what are the drivers really behind it. And my idea of discussing some of these is to say, yes, in our language, the way you package things, the rhetoric, is to show really that these changes are unavoidable, they are necessary, they are part of the unfolding of human history, which is very true to some extent. I believe it is, Saint Augustine who once said that God had made us for Him, and our hearts are restless until they find rest in Him. So, as long as we shall be alive, I understand that we will be thinking and trying to drive progress, to drive development, to get involved in those changes that are driving us to some place. But I was discussing the encyclical by Pope Leo the 14th, and I was reminding that we really need, and this is what the Pope is calling us to do, to bring the human person at the center of the conversation, and to keep also an eye on the horizon, which will remind us that we do not have our own substance in ourselves. We are accountable, as moral human beings, to someone else of whom we are just stewards of the creation that has been entrusted to us. So maybe very quickly, the quotation I'm making here, reference to, says, "We are living through a rapid phase of transition, a change of era, in which, while some are vying for the future of new technologies and others dedicate themselves to reflecting on the matter, most people are watching and waiting, observing from afar, and merely hoping for the best." And I believe Africa and Africans and many other people actually in the developing world are among those who are watching and waiting, observing from afar, and hoping for the best. For this very reason, crucial questions impose themselves on our conscience and can no longer be avoided. Where are we going? Toward what goal do we wish to orient ourselves? And in the context of my conversation this afternoon for you, Kenegan, when we talk about progress and growth and development, where is it taking us? Where is it leading us? But whose growth, whose development is it anyway? Okay, so that's just by way of introduction to what I would like to discuss. So I mentioned the transitions as multiple, the major one being the green transition. And by green transition, as we all know, it is important to remember that the way we utilize, we produce, first of all, utilize, consume, distribute energy is changing. And we are moving now more and more to the renewable and low carbon energy instead of the traditional fossil fuels such as coal, oil, gas that contribute to the climate change. By the same token, we can talk also about the climate transition, because of this growing awareness about how human beings are depleting, let's say, the resources in the universe, we are also contributing to the global warming. I was recently, last year, let's say, in September, in Belém at the COP30. And I remember meeting this lady from Vanuatu, an island, who was reminding us in a conversation that for some people, this might still sound very remote issue, but for people living on islands, they see the rising of the waters and they fear that their lands, their lives may disappear within a blink of an eye. And so we need to be aware of how the Anthropocene, I mean, the human activities on the universe are really making these changes faster or occurring faster. I mentioned Pope Leo's encyclical, and I think talking about the digital transition is also very important. Of course, these transitions are not bad in themselves. They are really good. And again, our connectivity, let's say from a small screen, a computer in front of us, it could be a telephone, it could be anything. When I was in Toronto, I was kidding my host, Peter, who might be in the room here, virtual room, and to whom I also bow and say thank you very much for coordinating some of these conversations. But I was kidding him by telling him that it was just beautiful to ride with him in his very beautiful, new car, electric completely, making no noise, producing no pollution whatsoever. And I told him it's like a futuristic thing, like a fiction, science fiction, to just be gliding on the road without any fear or of contributing to the global warming. But I was also reminding Peter that yes, and as much as we're doing this progress, it could be electrical cars, it could be any other technological innovation that we are seeing. They require a lot of raw material like natural resources, and these natural resources have come from somewhere. And this somewhere is these places where somehow we have low, like leadership governance, like participation. And therefore, communities where you find these mining sites are getting affected, strongly, heavily, losing their lives, losing their homes, losing their lands, and losing their identities. And I don't know whether talking about development, we can look at those kind of side effects, collateral damages, or negative externalities as part of the development, or if we should just put up with the idea of development and critically, regardless of what it is causing in the lives of so many other people. Another form of transition that is ongoing is the geopolitical transition. Many of us living in this part of the world, the developing world, as it is usually referred to, we look at the conflicts, we look at the wars, we look at the pandemics, powerless and overwhelmed, by that powerlessness. But we also know that these are consequences of the geopolitical transition, like the fights of these major superpowers, some willing to maintain their supremacy and others trying to overtake, the old, superpowers. So all of these changes and transitions are really ongoing. They are a reality with which we have to reckon, and there is no way we can talk about, balancing development and without looking at these transitions. So in short, these transitions are not merely a slogan. When we get to visit countries in the global north, we realize how much these transitions are real and benefiting a smaller fraction of humanity. They heavily depend on our resources in the global south, the minerals that are being extracted from developing countries. And because I live in the DRC and because the DRC has really been, at the heart of the history of development. I was reminding some of my audiences in Canada recently that even the uranium that manufactured the atomic bomb in the Second World War had to come all the way from the DRC and have ravaging, impact and consequences in Japan. So just to say how global the world has become, but you do have also countries such as Peru, where you dig and mine a lot of copper. You do have, countries like Myanmar or Indonesia in Asia. So many of the people in the developing world are really bearing the brunt of the technological progress or all the transitions that I've just referred to. And it is good that in our conversation, we bring them, at the table and see how they're impacting us. So my core argument really is to say that when we develop the discourse about sustainability, green transition, development, we often obscure deeply unequal costs, raising the unsettling possibility that frameworks such as the MDGs and the SDGs that the UN has been advocating for the past 15 years, 30 years, were constructed maybe on shifting sand. This is our experience. And I believe the voices from the global south needs to be heard or at least heeded so that we can be crafting programs and policies that will benefit all humankind, all humanity. So while benefits largely accrue to industrialized nations, Africa absorbs ecological and human costs. I am using an image in this slide, which you can see, and I want to let you know that this is real. This is not something like, far-fetched. It is real. It is happening. When you see places that are cleaner, like Tokyo, the city of Tokyo, like Toronto, you do have cities in parts of the world, mostly in Africa, that have become dumping sites for most of the garbage of the world, or all the toxics, that many of these multinationals are producing. And we need to raise questions about ethics and moral. So the next point I would like to discuss here is the human and ecological cost of extraction because of all these minerals that are entering into the different transitions that I just referred to. I don't think we can talk about anything positive like green transition, like digital transition, if mining communities are left behind. We need to know that to manufacture these computers that we're using, to manufacture these cell phones that we're using, to manufacture the chips, semiconductors and everything that is driving these transitions, we still need to get minerals from somewhere. And it happens that the DRC has really been one of the countries where you find a lot of resources, so much so that many people, theorists, scholars have been talking about the natural resources curse for the DRC. I usually contend that this theory has to be like rejected to some extent because I believe, to be honest, natural resources ought to be regarded as a blessing, never as a curse. It is the policies and the politics that we apply to have access to these resources that oftentimes become a curse for the people. And that is why, in the course of our conversation this evening, let us come back and discuss about the issues of governance. But just to say, electric cars or vehicles, renewable energy or solar panels, batteries, digital technologies and data centers and everything else, they really need the work of people in our countries. We can talk about industrial mining. We do also talk oftentimes about artisanal mining. And there is a huge, tremendous output that is coming from the artisanal miners, work, whose working conditions sometimes are dehumanizing to some extent. Okay. So communities often remain poor despite immense mineral wealth in their lands. Water sources are contaminated because you oftentimes to dig these minerals or to produce them, you need a lot of water. And as you might know, even in the digitalization of almost everything, the data center are using a lot of water that could be utilized by human communities. And so it is raising a new issue, a new problem about who ought to get priority over the use of resources. We see a lot of our forests getting cut down because mining companies are not stopped by anything. They can displace communities heartlessly, because they need to get to these resources. And these resources are really driving competition among multinationals, but also superpowers, because it will give them a comparative advantage in terms of technological advancement, you know. So we see all of these precarious conditions that are developing where women, children, and entire families are being ripped because people want to get to these resources. This is just one case study. A few kilometers away from Lubumbashi, where I live, we have this beautiful school built in stones. And these stones, mind you, are stones that were, developed, like rejected from the minerals, digging, like activities. So it is somehow a beautiful case, to look at because which other country would build a school with natural resources like minerals, all in stones, right? But you find a school that was built in the 50s here in the Congo, and that is being threatened of demolition. It is an all-girls school. It has trained so many women, giving them life and the possibility just to rise from, the rural, traditional previous lives to being leaders in communities and driving changes. But companies that have found a lot of minerals underneath the ground believe that they should destroy the school, first of all, displace the entire village and community. Whereas for us in Africa, it is not only the stones or the wealth. I think our identities are still very much tied to the land on which we settled. It is ancestral land, and the symbolic meaning cannot be just jeopardized because some people are trying to make profits. So this is one case I wanted to share very quickly with you. So bearing the negative externalities are the weaker and the poorer communities, and it shouldn't remain that way. This reality raises a crucial question when we talk about transition. Transition for whom? Transition to what? Whose transition? If the benefits of this transition accrue primarily the industrialized economies, while the human, social, and environmental costs are borne by the vulnerable population, then it is not a genuine transition at all. It is rather a perpetuation of structural injustices. And this I know for sure because the history of Africa is paved with those colonial rhetoric that are very positive and very beautiful and very, at, face value, but deeply they involve tremendous injustices that are unacceptable. We know the history of colonization in Africa. We know the even history of slavery in the Americas. And thank you very much, Kernigan, because I was impressed and I continue to be every time you begin a public, event like this one, that you would have that land acknowledgement, engagement. That's powerful. It raises awareness that we owe who we are and what we have to people who came before us and who fought to have a dignified life, and on whose shoulders we are hoisted. But oftentimes we forget that. And we also forget the sacrifices of those who fought so that we can gain independence and sovereignty. And unfortunately, that sovereignty and independence in Africa is still a far away dream. We're still fighting for it. So that is why I am looking at some of these theoretical, frameworks, or at least the way scholars have developed, issues about why we should get access to these minerals by all means. You know, I think the idea of progress is very enticing, and we know that progress is unending because I mentioned St. Augustine who said, our heart are restless. It is that inquietude, anxiety that is existential, fundamental within us that drives us to try to look for means to improve the living conditions within which we know. And I believe, progress sells as a concept because everybody wants to improve their living conditions. But with the moment the colonial policy was developed, driven by the idea of spreading the benefit of progress, and the way we have also received the idea of globalization as a way of integrating Africa within, the benefits of globalization, all of these have been or have proved to be, how do I put this? Let's say, deceiving. And that is why we see a lot of critiques, many people who are criticizing some of these theories from a post-colonial perspective, just to remind us that we have been fooled once, we have been fooled twice, but we should be more careful now that the rhetoric developed around progress, technological innovation, knowledge transfer, and everything else is trying to fool us one more time because everything that the West wants is to have access to our resources. And so among the let's say the theories of development, the one I push for, the one I resonate with the most is Amartya Sen's capabilities approach, in which Amartya Sen reminds us really that to be developed, it is to have the freedoms, to choose the kind of life that any community would have any reason to value. So you have the value idea behind, meaning what are the values by which this community wants to live? Is it only material, or are they moral and spiritual? Or are they, so what is the role, the place of ethics, in the conversation about progress and development that we are seeing here? As I mentioned, we have had many, ideas or theories of development. During colonization, we know that many infrastructure were developed, and I always remember having this conversation with one of my very dear friend and mentor, a Jesuit historian, when I was doing my studies in Chicago, and who was keen at reminding me, oh, colonization has brought so much good to Africa in terms of developing hospitals and schools and roads and all these infrastructures, which is usually used as measurement of development. And I would disagree with my fellow Jesuit and mentor and tell him, it is unfortunate that you are being very materialistic by way of measuring development, because at the same time that these roads were being built, they were not being built for Africans. They were being built to move all the resources that were being extracted from Africa to go and benefit and develop some other communities. And so that moral side needs to be in the minds of people when we're discussing about this. So development, as I mentioned, from Amartya Sen, and as an economist, sorry, and Martha Nussbaum, who is a philosopher, the purpose of development is indeed human flourishing. So how much flourishing are we getting from these new innovations? And I believe even when for those of you who might be willing to get into this conversation about Magnifica Humanitas, the new encyclical developed by Pope Leo, I think that is what he's raising as a question. How much this digitization of the world is allowing the human communities to flourish, the human being to be dignified, magnified, to be acknowledged as a sacred, creature who deserves attention, care, and protection? Or are we just becoming numbers, algorithms, and losing our freedoms in the course and the process of this development? And so, substantively understood development, I mean, as freedoms and opportunities to lead, to live the kind of lives that the people have reason to value. So, the capabilities approach refers to what people are actually able to do and to be. Okay. I have encountered many scholars from the global north who believe that yes, I am here referring, for instance, for David Miller. He has written this wonderful book about nation responsibility and global justice, and this is where you will find that at the global level, some people are advocating for globalizing negative externalities while appropriating like the positive, benefits of globalization. And I think it is just not morally acceptable. It is unfair. Okay. Um, there is a scholar, Charles Bates, who has written a lot about cosmopolitanism and global justice. And the reason I am referring to Charles Bates is because maybe he can speak to the audience in North America. He's well studied there, and he has been trying to push for utilizing, let's say, the theory of justice of John Rawls in approaching the international relations. And unlike Miller that I've just mentioned, who believes that the responsibility of individuals belong to the respective governments, Bates at least believes that the unit of analysis, even in international relations, should be individuals. It's meaning human beings. And the moment we begin to raise our awareness to that responsibility that we have vis-a-vis the other, then we know that impact and externalities cannot simply be accepted, uncritically because of the material profits or technological advancement that we are trying to build. So, in my view, the global energy transition, the digital transition, while all the progress are urgent, as we can see, they cannot be considered equitable in the face of the climate crisis and the environmental and social damages caused by the scramble for critical minerals. Development cannot continue to rely on the asymmetric exploitation of resources in the global south, particularly when to make this growth sustainable. We still need cobalt that will come from Congo, copper that will come from Congo or Peru, coltan that will have been fueling the wars in Eastern Congo for the last 30 years, mind you. So since 1996, many lives have been lost in the eastern part of the Congo. Some statistics present even up to 10 million lives lost simply because some multinationals or some companies want to have access to coltan. And now we have discovered that lithium is a part of the deposit that God has endowed to this land, to this part of the world. And while the Lobito Corridor project is developing, people are expressing their fears and anxieties. What again are we going to be living in terms of wars, in terms of conflicts, in terms of displacement, because of these resources? How can we govern them in a way, such a way that um, we promote, the human dignity? So we therefore calls for a transition, whether energy or digital transition, based not only on technological progress, but also on human dignity, on community participation, on social justice, and so on and so forth. We know that even democracy itself is in danger because of some of this progress. And we are seeing a country as old a democracy as the US, 250 years of independence that is being celebrated this year. But even its democracy or democratic culture is getting threatened by some level of authoritarianism. So, which means it is time for us as a human community to come together and discuss. So, Kenneth, I don't know how much would you like me to go on, because I know that we will have some interaction, but I may have another couple of slides. Is that okay? Just let me know. Okay, you
Absolutely.
can stop if you want.
It would be great if we do have time to kind of converse, you and I. But if you've got two more slides to do, please proceed.
Okay, let me. So yeah. Just very quickly, I can summarize these slides. And my question here is to ask our audience that is participating in this conversation, when we listen to these stories coming from far away, whether it is Myanmar, whether it is the DRC, or Peru, or Chile, or Ecuador, why should we care? Why should this conversation matter to us at all? I really believe environmental degradation, displacement and poverty of communities around the world, unsafe labor conditions that are being forced on some people to get by, to get just a living, wage, um, the weak governance of some countries around the world, or all the gender-based vulnerabilities that we see, in this part of the world, and the limited participation in the decision making, as I said, democracy being threatened, it is not only affecting those who are more vulnerable, those who are poorer, those who are far from the centers of power. It is a global concern. It is a concern for the whole humankind. So it is the future of humanity that is at stake. And that is why all of us, we need to care about, transition. I mentioned that, when we wanted to raise awareness about the global warming, Pope Francis produced a document, Laudato Si, which has become a landmark, document, allowing us to grow in awareness about what can we do to protect our common home. When we see the human dignity of individuals being put at threat given the development of artificial intelligence, Pope Leo has come up with another document reminding us that, we need to come together and discuss the consequences of this growth, progress, and development. Wars are being fought not by human beings, but by robots or drones from a far remote place. And it's becoming like a video game because no more, soldiers will see the face of their enemies that they are just killing. And when you remove the face of a human being from that interaction, you understand that even human beings are getting like machines, like robots, killing our emotional side, right? Jobs, interviews, maybe our recruitment are being conducted by algorithms, and that capacity to listen to, the needs, the desires, the histories of people is being lost in the process. And so, how can you humanize some of this progress in technology that we're talking about? In conclusion, I would like maybe to take us back to what we have been advocating as, in the church as, integral human development. In 1996, Pope Paul VI wrote this encyclical called Populorum Progressio, in which he described development as a transition from less humane to more humane living conditions. And I like that. So less humane are the technologies and innovations are making us more humane or less humane? This is a question for us to debate. Furthermore, he argued that development is a process, sorry, that concern each person and the whole person. So development has to be taken in a global manner, in a way that is much more encompassing and not only based on the measurement that I mentioned, which could be profit making, wealth, producing, or technology or technological innovation. That is every dimension of the human person and all people without exception. Understood in this way, development is in reality the new name for peace. This was what Pope Paul VI said in 1967. And this is still very true today. All of our conflicts today, the wars, the killings, the degrading of the sacredness of human beings is because we want to develop materially, but to shrink spiritually and morally. And that is not something that we can advocate. It aims to eradicate the roots of injustice and conflict and create opportunities for a more dignified life of all. So let us continue to push for a transition that is fair. Let us continue to remember that Africa really has contributed tremendously throughout history, not only by the extraction of human beings during the slave trade to develop Northern America as we know it, which has been recognized recently by the General Assembly of the United Nations as a grave sin, as a moral sin, as something that really calls for reparation. But Africa must not remain a sacrifice zone. We call for justice, not only charity, justice and solidarity. And also, integral justice includes social justice, it includes historical justice, it includes environmental justice, and it requires structural changes, to the world that we are building and which we will be passing on to the next generation. So I will stop there to allow us more time for conversation. Thank you so very much for your attention and for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very, very much, Father Toussaint. The framing of the issues and your perspective as a citizen of the DRC is particularly valuable, as opposed to hearing it from other parties, whoever those other parties are, the media or someone who purports to represent your perspective. So I think that's what makes it particularly powerful. My immediate thoughts are we are living in concentric circles of collective decision making, from the family to the community, through to the nation, the government involved, but also through private sector organizations, through to intergovernmental bodies. And these concentric circles, each has got unique powers, each has got unique perspectives, each has got unique capabilities. You've been emphasizing, and I understand why, the significant role to be played by the faith, sort of the faith community. And I do think that there's a lot of extremely valuable values, articulation of those values, and attempts to kind of ensure or insist that conversations concerning development, whatever it is we're going to define as development, takes into account these sorts of values and doesn't run roughshod over it, which seems to be largely the case as things are now. A phrase that I've come up for dealing with the current situation is technological adolescence. That is to say, we're like children with very, very powerful tools in our hands, but we really don't know, as children, we really don't know how to use them. So we use them in very, very inappropriate ways. And I see that around the world taking place. So I think that the question flowing back to you is in this particular moment in time, at the geopolitical level, at the economic level, at the environmental level, at the technological level, and then more directly in DRC with the horrific power struggles that are going on right now, with Canadian companies being there, with the Canadian government shifting their particular approach towards addressing these issues. I'm interested to hear what is your suggestions for a pathway forward that draws on the unique positive capabilities of each of these different nexuses of power, if I can call them that, and to address with these challenges and to minimize the negative impacts, which unfortunately, that's what we're seeing mostly right now, is the negative impacts.
Yeah, and again, thank you so very much for that, powerful question. And the way you just frame it is very powerful as well. It is true that I think we live in these, you call them, concentric cycles. And I think, each of them, has some level of allegiance that they demand from us. And those are like kind of multiple identities and challenges that we do have. But to address the question that you just raised, I believe what comes to mind strongly is, first of all, to remember that we are also moral and believing beings. Moral because, and that is why I used, some, of the definition about development, provided by Amartya Sen in his now famous book, Development as Freedom. Um, Reminding us strongly that uh, we cannot do away with the values that have shaped our societies, our history, our civilization, as human beings. And we really need to have that moral compass whenever we are making decisions about some of the development projects. The image that you're using also, comparing, like, it's an allegory of children playing with tools, with gadgets, with that are powerful. To some extent, we can even look at it as a Frankenstein. We develop things with the intention of being served by them, but in the end, the things end up becoming our masters and destroying us, our lives. So the pathway for me would be also, how much are we fighting to preserve democracy? Because I think I've seen how the democratic process started 30 years ago when we're coming out of the Cold War, and pushing some of the liberal values here. And the discussion that we were having were to say whether democracy was compatible with African cultures. But now we can see around the world that it is not an African issue or something that we can, localized to a specific area. I think democracy is being demanded strongly, whether by traditional democratic powers like the US or by a country fragile like the Democratic Republic of Congo, because it is only when we have strong democratic institutions that, first of all, at the level of principles, we will agree to respect and protect that which is sacred and fundamental to each and every single human being. And the second, at the level of community, we can say that we are looking at those processes through which decisions are being made, do not belong to a handful, group of people that concentrate power, money, knowledge even, but can also pay attention to, let's say, those vulnerable faces that have been hidden, invisible, and vulnerable, but whose humanity has a lot to teach, and bring to our care and attention. So I think defending, promoting, protecting democracy is one way or one pathway forward, because even in the use of these, let's say artificial intelligence and technological innovations, unless we all can have a voice to the chapter, some people will continue to skew, the production and consumption of these tools, to the expense of other communities. So what do we do? How do we push that, our citizenry, our citizenship, is educated, informed, and continue to stand up to defend that which we value and we have reason to value and protect and promote. So yeah, basically that's what I can say.
Those are powerful thoughts, Father Toussaint. Maybe just a final round here. Uh,
Mm.
I look at any particular entity, and you are, a proud member of the Jesuits, for example. I'm a proud member of the university sort of uh, group sector, um, and I think each of us within our areas has a capability, and I would argue a responsibility to attempt to move things towards the concept of justice that you're talking about, which recognizes respect for rights and dignity and works up from that. I'm thinking when I look at the
Mhm.
Jesuits have in the past and even right now in some parts of the world, in Australia, for example, they have actually worked directly. They're developing wineries. So basically, producing wines that then they proceed to, first of all, the way in which they produce them is entirely in alignment with the teachings that the Jesuits hold dear. But that's using the unique capability of the Jesuits to participate directly in the economy. Um, and over in my part of the world, at the university, I'm exploring how it is that middle powers can potentially play a much greater role to counter some of the excesses of the what we call the superpowers or the great powers, as the case might be. And I can explore that from where I am in universities because the universities have got a particular profile, just like the Jesuits have got a
Mm.
particular profile. So I'm interested to hear, is there any particular kind of pathway that you see, for example, the Jesuits taking, where they are modeling, for example, behavior that they would like to see taken up by the extractive sector, for example, in the DRC, either working directly with mining companies or with governments, or actually taking on some extractive sector activities themselves and demonstrating how extractive sector activities can be undertaken in a way which is entirely in keeping with the unique values of the Jesuits. And I'm not suggesting that is in fact what you should do. I'm just throwing that out there as a kind of a conversation starter. Um, and then you, with your incredible experience navigating through that world as a member of the DRC and as a member of the Jesuits, I'm interested to hear, do you have any particular pathways forward where the Jesuits can potentially um, play a kind of a unique uh, lead role?
Mhm. Wow. Thank you. That's a tall challenge, tall order, which I like very much, to be honest. I think what I liked in what you said was to remind us that we do have agency and we do have responsibilities. And as a priest, I can also refer to the scriptures reminding us that to those to whom much has been given, much will be expected. So much will be demanded. And so, yeah, I think the universities actually, as you mentioned, and some other, middle powers, those who are aware of what we have been entrusted with, should be ready to serve the communities in a much more consistent way. And I would say that our entire commitment really as Jesuit worldwide is what we're trying to do. First of all, at the level of universal, Jesuits community, like the, Global Society of Jesus, we have a strong network of Jesuits from India to Pakistan to Congo to Zambia to Malawi to Peru to, all these countries. We do have a strong network of Jesuit institutions, which we call social centers, involved in studying and raising awareness about these ethical, issues in the mining sector. So we're very much involved and we share best practices, knowledges, experiences. We meet, we pray, so that we understand that notion of stewardship. Uh, all of what we have today is not for us to consume egotistically, but as for us to use for the sake of human flourishing, development of all. But the one thing that we like also to factor in is to remind us that we shall not only be accountable to the one we consider to be the master of the universe, I mean, the creator, but also to our own children, our own next generation. What kind of a world do we want to hand over to them? Of course, we may claim, okay, development, technology, and everything else is advancement, and that is what we want for them. But what do we do with all the values that make us human beings? Looking in the face of each other and recognizing the transcendence that each and every single human being represents. So that would be one part of what the Jesuits have been doing. The Jesuits do not own mines. We do have a history as Jesuits, and I am sure many people who have some interest with the Jesuit history have seen, that movie, The Mission, with great music by Ennio Morricone, reminding us of the reductions in the Paraguay back in those days. So it's a legacy of the Jesuit, it's a history of the Jesuit, and it is something that we feel we can live out differently, not necessarily by developing such powerful political, entities that are controlled, but the schools, the trainings, the parishes, the social centers that I mentioned that we do have are instrument for us to continue shaping, that spiritual dimension and spiritual approach to how we appropriate reality and how we try to transform that reality. So directly, we may be working with, let's say, leaders who have the decision-making power, in their hand and capacity, so that these leaders can make the right decisions that will affect communities in good ways. We create spaces, as I mentioned in my previous intervention, to develop that dialogue between multinationals, right, and communities. And we are in the middle, to just facilitate and build bridges so that, experiences that we are shaping and wealth that we are producing can cross-fertilize and begin to create a society that has a human face. But just to say, maybe our approach may be different, but I know that even when I mentioned the book, like the encyclical produced by the Pope, it is a way to weigh in the conversation that will shape our own awareness, our own values, our own, societies today, to understand that arrangement, political, social, moral that we want to live by have to be informed by some of the values upon which we agree. And these values are: how much do we protect the vulnerable people, the communities, and their histories? How much humane we want to be, or how much machine-like we want to become? So Jesuits have this approach of empowering others. We have Father Pedro Arrupe, who during the 70s actually used to push to say we need to train men and women for others and with others. So we live within the world with others, we share our values with them, but we wanted to train them in our schools, high school, primary school, universities, to do research, our social centers, in such a way that human beings can become agents of their own changes and responsible of their own future. To use your own words, Kennigan. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Father Toussaint. I think those are, again, extremely powerful words. You're making a very significant point, and that is ultimately it is our thoughts and our values which then drive us in our concentric circles, whichever they are. And of course, we're involved, all of us, in multiple concentric circles at the same time. So the more that we can interact and have those based upon a set of values that are respectful of human dignity and so on, and work from that, I
Mhm.
think the better off we'll all be. It's an enormous challenge. And that's why I kind of threw out this idea of the Jesuits in Australia actually, uh, I perhaps you could call it even a praxis. Like they're moving beyond just the teaching side to say, and here's how we're actually living it in a way. We're modeling this behavior in the production of this particular thing here, and I just the soil, so to speak, of the Congo, DRC, is different than the soil of Australia. So it just occurred to me that there was some possibility for the Jesuits to work directly in the mining sector and to be demonstrating this is how it could be done in a way where it benefits, first and foremost, it benefits the people of DRC, and how we're at the same time training them, education, but also just physical well-being. So it shows that it can be done. And then those resources can also be useful in other parts of the world for the greening of the economy and that sort of thing. But here we are in the DRC demonstrating how that can be done in a way which is entirely aligned with what the Pope has said and what we as Jesuits believe and so on. So it was really just, I was intrigued by this Australian example of the Jesuits from right now, from 2026, and was just exploring, like as they say, thinking out loud with you as to is there a variation on that that could be done in the DRC? But really, I'm speaking as someone. I'm struggling with my own ideas here about how to do things in Canada, and I cannot speak with any degree of knowledge about what would work in DRC. So really just throwing that out for your consideration and the consideration of your colleagues in the broader Jesuit community.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate that actually. It's a very stimulating and emulating idea. So I'm sure we'll discuss this with my fellow Jesuits. We're trying, to be involved in so many other things. Maybe I will mention this on the sides. But here at CAF, we have been really involved in, like social advocacy, social issues. But now we are in the process of developing a environmental lab, right? To analyze soil, air and water, because we live in a mining sector and we assume this will be something that can empower really the communities to continue to push for the decision making, to advocate for their own good
Yeah.
and to hold
Yes.
accountable also the multinationals that are working within the region. And maybe at some point I will get back to you on this issue and say, hey,
Mhm.
for the ISO, like a certification, how much can we work together and so on and so forth. But
That
thank
sounds
you
very
very
good.
much. Sure.
Thank you again. All the best. I think it's in the evening for you now. So I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us in the evening of your day. And let's see if we can circle back in a while, perhaps in a year or two, and see what sorts of progress you're making and we're making and the world is making. We're in a very, very turbulent period, as the Chinese say. Crisis and opportunity. So it's a question of what we can do in this turbulent time. So I wish you and your colleagues all the best as you continue your work, and let's continue the conversation.
Wonderful. I appreciate this. Thank you so very much for creating this space. Yeah, despite the time difference, I know you were a very busy person as well. So to show this care, this awareness about global issues and concern for global justice is not something we take for granted. So I want to commend you and to say thank you. Thank you also for the work you're doing at the Institute for Social Corporate Responsibility at Toronto Metropolitan University. These are the new things actually that we really need to bring to the next, younger generation, so that we become, because everybody has been saying, yeah, we are global citizens, we are citizens of the world, right? But at the same time, we want to remain parochial in the way we approach our own lives and issues and morals and ethics. And we say, whatever is happening there does not concern me, I don't care. Yet, some of these powerful countries with powerful passports jump on a plane and they are at the extremity of the world the next day without any, hassles of, visa application and whatever. So let us continue to impact and instill those values, global values, in our students, in our younger ones, and continue to build a world that really has a human face, and this is the work you're doing, which I want to acknowledge and commend. So thank you indeed. I look forward for more interaction and for greater collaboration in the future.
Terrific. On behalf of Toronto Metropolitan University in general, and specifically the Toronto Metropolitan University Institute for the Study of Corporate Social Responsibility, thanks again for taking the time, and all the best in your work. And let's keep on talking.
God bless. Thank you.